The God of the Machine by Isabel Paterson. So, this book is, I do say, an immensely important work. In fact, for my money, I would say that this book may very well be the most important book ever written, barring, I suppose, like religious texts. Otherwise, though, like I said, for my money, this book really does stand the chance, I would say, of being perhaps the most important book ever penned. And it is a crying shame, the greatest of tragedies, that this book has fallen kind of into obscurity over the years because what it says, I would say, is both vital and timeless. And I'm going to tell you all about it as per usual. So, Isabel Paterson was a Canadian American, I guess what you might call rogue scholar who lived throughout the early to mid 20th century. What's interesting about Paterson is that she had exceedingly little formal education. She grew up, I believe, on a cattle ranch in Alberta. And again, she had very little formal schooling, but she was apparently a voracious reader and basically educated herself more or less. And that makes this book all the more impressive because this book is quite erudite. The aims of this book are essentially to explicate the sanctity of the individual. It is a work, I suppose you might say, of individualist philosophy. In fact, I would say that this is probably the final word in individualist philosophy, or it may very well be. But the breadth of subjects and topics that it covers, that it spans, is quite impressive, ranging from philosophy to history to economics. Um, the erudition on display here is quite striking, and again, that makes it all the more impressive given that Paterson had very little formal education. Reading this book, I was actually sort of reminded of reading like The Decline of the West by Oswald Spengler, because that is also a work which displays a broad erudition, but was written by a non-academic, but someone who obviously knew quite a bit. This book kind of strikes me as being similar to that in certain respects. But anyway, so Isabel Paterson worked a number of jobs over her life supporting herself, but this book, The God of the Machine, is basically her most famous and enduring contribution to the world. It is, like I said, a work of individualist philosophy which attempts to explicate the sanctity of the individual, and again, it covers topics and subjects from philosophy to history and economics. Um, now, the book is not particularly long. In fact, it's only a little bit over 300 pages, but it gets a lot in there, and it really covers some ground. And it uses a kind of unique metaphor, kind of a running motif throughout this, of energy. It uses mechanical and engineering terms to craft a kind of elaborate metaphor for human potential. That human potential, human energy is like electricity, which seeks to flow throughout a completed circuit. So I hope you're at least passingly familiar with terms from mechanics and engineering, because it kind of assumes that you are. And again, some of the metaphor might be a little lost on people that aren't. But anyway, so the book starts out, I'm just going to kind of cover the broad outline of the book and then say what I think is so incredibly important about it. But the book starts out with kind of a history lesson covering the evolution from Greece to Rome and what the Roman mode of civilization really signified, and also going from there throughout the Middle Ages and arriving at the founding of America. And one thing that this book really hammers home is that America fundamentally is the city on the hill. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I would say that as an American, but she, I would remind you, was not American by birth, but was in fact Canadian by birth. But um, what the book masterfully illustrates is that the founding of America was nothing short of a watershed moment in the history of human development, and that America, even though America's history has been anything but sterling, that America has certainly had its faults and shortcomings, but in spite of all that, the ideal that America was founded upon remains essentially the noblest in human history. That America politically is the city on the hill, basically. That the American Declaration and Constitution are two of the greatest, or probably the two greatest political documents ever penned. Um, they are the springboards for the modern conception of uh, human rights and uh, again the sanctity of the individual, and also the way that we view government is not our master but our servant. Ideally, at least anyway. But anyway, and so from there, it also segues into some pretty intensive economics and uh, really tries to get across the importance of real money, that is gold. Um, that money not backed with gold is fiat currency, which is just toilet paper basically. But when you get right down to it, but anyway, and then from there it goes off into some kind of predictive things about how uh, public state-sponsored education kind of has an inherent tendency to devolve into state-sponsored indoctrination, which I think that we're seeing that come to fruition now. And then the last chapter is kind of just saying, where do we go from here? Where does um, the human energy circuit go now and such? That's kind of just the broad overview of the book. But again, I think the contents of this book are of the utmost, the highest importance because they really are vital and they really are timeless. And I would like to say this, perhaps the most important thing that this book says, perhaps the most important point that it makes, and that's I've really got to say that just everything in this book I think is just of vital importance. But perhaps if I were to pick out the most important thing that this book has to say, it would have to be um, the nature of human rights and how those rights are founded, uh, and that human rights can only be uh, founded on a philosophy that recognizes that man is a creature not just of flesh but also of spirit. This book was written, I might add, I think while World War II was ongoing, actually. Um, but the atrocities which took place in Europe in the 20th century, in Russia and in Germany and in Italy, were precipitated by a decline into materialism and philosophies which viewed humans not as free agents working towards their own ultimate destiny, the captains of their own ship, but only as reactive clockwork mechanisms which are simply conditioned by nature and have no deeper significance. And that is a very, very dangerous thing. Very dangerous thing. And that's what this book makes plain, is that any philosophy which does not recognize the soul of man, um, the gulag and the death camp are only a few steps behind. Um, and this brings me to kind of an interesting point. America in the modern world now is often scoffed at by certainly the nations of Europe and kind of just the world in general as being um, overly religious, kind of, especially given I'm talking in particular about the nature of American evangelicalism. Um, that America is kind of a nation of zealots and fundamentalists, and a lot of the rest of the world kind of scoffs at that. But after reading this book, that I was made to reflect that it is America's kind of hyper religious mentality, which has probably saved it from having the same atrocities befall it as befell Russia, as befell Germany, because that is what ties us to the recognition of the fact that we are creatures of spirit. Now, I'm not saying that that is necessarily inherently a Christian um, idea, but uh, it nonetheless serves to make us remember that there's more to man than flesh and blood, and man is not nourished on bread alone. And looking at some things that are happening now in Europe, given that Europe is a drastically less religious milieu than America is, I think that might be vindicated. I think that is kind of an astute um, observation to point out that it is America's very, very religious character that has perhaps saved it from some of the same atrocities as has happened in Europe in recent memory. But anyway, the most important thing I just want to reiterate that this book points out is that rights have to be founded in a spiritual sense. They cannot come from a philosophy of materialism. In any nation, any country, any civilization that subsides into materialism, bad things are going to follow, um, as the 20th century makes manifest. But this book is just such a treasure trove because it is, once again, I would say possibly the final word in individualist philosophy. It is truly the be all end all work of individualism, both philosophically, economically, and historically. It is truly one of the, it may be the most impressive single work that I've ever read. It is brilliant, it is intellectually intensive and very rigorous in its approach to these issues. But these issues, sadly, are things that I think we, you know, like they say, the people who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Um, Looking at the world today, it seems as though we're going back down the same road that the world has gone down in the past. And this book stands as a shining beacon of truth um, about the nature of human rights, where those rights come from, and why um, any civilization that will transgress the rights of the individual, that will trample upon the sanctity of the individual, is a civilization in which quite literally anything goes and anything will go given long enough. And this book is, again, it is just, I would say, a shining beacon of truth. Normally, I don't really rate works such as this of a more philosophical, speculative character because the criteria is kind of up in the air sometimes. But for this, I'm giving this an A freaking plus. This book is, again, probably the most impressive and the most important, or certainly one of the most important things that I've ever read. Um, it may very well be, again, barring like religious texts or anything like that, it may very well be otherwise the most important work ever written, and it is once again the greatest of tragedies that it has fallen by the wayside over the years because um, it is, I think, vital. So yeah, I'm giving this an A freaking plus. It is a masterpiece, nothing less. So yeah, The God of the Machine by Isabel Paterson. Have you read this? I'm going to wager most out there probably haven't because again, it's kind of an obscure book now. But if on the off chance you have, let me know down in the comments what you thought about it, whether you have agreed or disagreed with anything I've said. And if you haven't read it, pick this up. I mean, this is like not only this could quite literally be like some life saving stuff here. Seriously, I don't exaggerate. I don't think um, by saying that. But anyway, so yeah, read this. It is vitally important and timelessly true. And as always, if you have enjoyed anything you've seen or heard here today, remember to hit that like button and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. And until next time, peace.